Hiroshima, and they wouldn't give up. And that's like the highest mountain there, and they're putting the flag in as if they've conquered it.
So this is ninth grade lit, and we were talking about what happened 76 years ago today. This photo was taken 76 years ago, and this is ninth grade lit. And Will just pointed out that this was a mountain on this small island. The island's, I wish I could tell you exactly how many 100 miles it was from Japan, but it was important in the war in the Pacific because as the Marines, and the war in the Pacific was fought by the Marine Corps because they are trained in amphibious warfare. In Europe, there were 3 amphibious landings, one in North Africa, well, 4 I guess, North Africa, Sicily, Italy, and France. But and U.S. Army troops were a part of all that. But in the Pacific, there were dozens of amphibious landings. And so they would travel by ship and then land on these islands and fight the Japanese. This was the last island that needed to be, it was in 1945, 76 years ago. It was the last island that the U.S. military needed because American airplanes were already flying over Japan, bombing them. There was this belief that the Japanese would not surrender. They would have to be bombed into submission. And so we were already doing that. Did that in Europe, had to do that to Germany. So they were doing that to Japan, but there needed to be a place for these bombers and fighter escort planes to land if they got shot up or if they needed fuel. So it was just a little bit too far, so they needed this island. There were 21,000 Japanese soldiers on the island. It took 36 days for the Marines to take over. There were 21,000 Japanese soldiers. There were about 21,000 Japanese casualties. I'm talking about deaths. There were a handful of soldiers who surrendered, but most of them, they fought almost literally to the last man. I don't know how many Marines landed, but almost 7,000 were killed. Probably the greatest loss of life for the Marine Corps in any one battle. More Medal of Honors were given out at this battle up to that point, and I think even since then, I don't know that, but than any war, any battle that had been fought by the Marines. I don't know how many there were, but it's the ultimate medal that we can honor our soldiers with. But the story behind the picture is also one of the reasons, I would like to show you. I became interested. You went to Washington, D.C. You've seen it, right? You recognize one of the most recognizable photos ever taken. And the story was that 3 or 4 days, they landed the 19th, so it was the 23rd. So 4 days after they landed, Mount Suribachi, which is an extinct volcanic mountain, and it's a small island. It's just a few miles wide, a few miles long. So there's not much there. And for days on end, the U.S. Navy had shelled the place. So that, look at the top of that. There's nothing living. It is said that most Marines never saw a living Japanese soldier. They were all underground with a series of tunnels and bunkers, and so they would come out and fight and go back in. They would fight from underground, and so literally the Marines had to go through one tunnel or one bunker right after the other, and it was killing using flamethrowers. That's awful. They have to use fire to kill them. But 4 days in, the Suribachi was already taken, even though they were still there for 32 more days. And someone had actually, a group of Marines had actually put a flag up. Well, one of the Marine officers on the beach looked up, and he didn't like the flag. It wasn't big enough. So he found a bigger flag, and he says to one of the guys who took the flag up, the way the story goes, it's the guy you can't see back there, his name Rene Gagnon. I think he was the one that actually was given the flag. Said, go up there, and I won't use his exact words, but he said, go to the top of that mountain and put up this flag so that every SOB, he used the expression, on the island can see it. Sounds like a Marine, doesn't it? So this group, I don't even know if they knew each other. They didn't know, they weren't like buddies. They're just, you, let's go. So they climbed to the top. There were other Marines at the top, and there were 2 photographers. They had taken pictures of the first flag. You can see pictures. I don't know that it's a flag raising, but there you can see pictures of the first flag. Well, this was going to be the second, bigger flag. And so these 2 photographers, one's name was Joe Rosenthal. He's the guy that took this picture. I don't know who the other man's name was, but he had a motion picture camera with him. So you can see motion pictures of film of the flag raising in color. At least, I don't know, maybe it's colorized, but anyway, that they didn't become as famous. This became famous. Well, it happened really fast. They're up there to take the picture of the second flag raising. The Marines find a pole, some sort of metal pole, probably left by the Japanese. They put this big flag on it, and they put it up. You know, they're not posing, they're not staging something, they're just putting it up, like their officer told them to do. Well, the 2 photographers were talking, and as Joe Rosenthal tells, as I read the story, he turns, and it's already going up. So he takes his camera. Anybody in here take photography? Anybody consider yourself a photographer? Well, there's a lot you can do to make a good picture. It's more than just snapping a picture. It's you know, it's staging it. It's framing it. You know, there are a lot of things. He didn't have time to do that. So he had his camera. Imagine it's around his neck. You've seen those big camera. He pulls it out like this and snaps it. It's like if you were going to take a picture, instead of taking it like that, you just, hey, and you stop it and you click it without looking through it. He didn't look through the viewfinder. He had no idea what he took. It could have been all mountain. It could have been all flag. It could have been all, you know, knees and down, or you know how every time my dad used to take a picture, he'd cut everybody's head off. He could never frame the picture. It would always be like from here down or here down. It just, you know, was it all sky? Was it all Pacific Ocean? He didn't know. So he snapped the picture. At some point that day or a few days later, all the film is taken off the island. The photographers stay there. They reload, but the film is taken off the island, and I think it was taken to some place like Guam or Wake or Midway, somewhere before you get to Hawaii. And the U.S. Navy was there, and they would develop the pictures. And so the story goes that these 2 guys were in this dark room. If you've ever seen a dark room, you get the negative, and I've done it before. Actually, it's really fascinating. I don't know how you do color photos, but that was black and white. And you expose, you have photographic paper, and I don't know, at some point you expose the film to the paper, but you put the paper in some sort of chemical, and the photo just kind of materializes in front of you like magic. You know, just from a blank sheet of photography paper, it just becomes a picture. And the story goes, this is what another negative, just hand him a negative, just like, you know, making cars, is assembly line. He doesn't know what he's developing. So out of the hundreds of pictures, or maybe thousands, I'm sure, ultimately he developed and printed, he saw this. He immediately knew what he had to do, you know, what it was. I mean, he knew, whoa, look at this. He showed it to his buddy. A couple of days later, the Sunday edition of the New York Times, this is on the front page. And history's made. Again, the event was historic, but the photo has become almost equally historic. Interesting thing about that, it made the men famous. Well, nobody knew who they were at first. You know, get up there and it's over. And they go about fighting the war. Well, at some point, it becomes famous. And we got to get those guys back to America. We got to meet those guys. 3 of them didn't make it off the island. He didn't make it off the island. These 2 didn't make it off the island. This one did, and these 2 did. And so they ask questions, they interview people, they come up with 3 guys, John Bradley, Gagnon, what's his first name? Eric Gagnon, that's not his name, Renee Gagnon, and Ira Hayes are the three guys that survived. The story that I read years ago, made into a really popular movie, was Flags of Our Fathers. I've never seen the movie, I read the book, and I'd grown up all my life seeing the picture. Didn't realize they were real people, never thought about it. And so this book was written, and this man's son wrote the book. He's a Navy corpsman, which is a medic. The Navy supplied the medics for the Marine Corps. And these three men that I mentioned were exploited. They were brought home and made to tour the country reenacting the flag raising, which, if you think about it, that's pretty demeaning. It cheapens it, doesn't it? If you do, this was a once in a lifetime event, and yet here they do it again. We raise the flag again in this shopping center or this, Main Street, and it just becomes cheap. And I think that bothered them. Ira Hayes was an American Indian. There's a Indian blanket hanging out of his back belt. I should start over here. The original interview eventually determined that this man's name was Harlan Block. You can't see his face. In fact, you can't see any of their faces. Partially, you can see his face. I think it would have been better if they had remained unknown. They kind of, at least through the photograph, it's kind of like these were the unknown soldiers. They represent every Marine on the Iwo Jima, every Marine in the Pacific, every Marine of every battle, every GI, every sailor, every airman, every guardsman of every war. It's like these people, it's not just Marines on Iwo Jima, it's like represent every soldier's every fought in combat. And if we had never known their names, it might have been better. Because some of them apparently were misidentified. Some believe that wasn't Harlan Block, or that was John Bradley, or that was Renee Gagnon. These three, there's been, I guess, evidence that maybe who we thought did it didn't do it. But again, they did make this effort. If you want to read a good book, it's somewhat outdated since they've made some changes, but it's called Flags of Our Fathers. Harlan Block, he didn't get off the island. They figured out, well, they thought they figured out who it was. They took this photograph to his mother in Texas, and she said, well, yeah, that's Harlan. I recognize his rear end anyway. That was her response. John Bradley was the corpsman who was the medic. He did survive the war and lived into his 80s. After he died, they found a little box of souvenirs under his bed. John Bradley's son, who wrote the book, said that his father woke up 20, 30 years after the fact crying at night. Can you imagine trying to save Marines' lives? You can't save them all. And what he saw, what he had to live with, the aftermath of that war, it was awful, and he never really got over it. Renee Gagnon survived. Ira Hayes survived, and he died of alcoholism. Renee Gagnon, I think, died of the three. He was the second one who died. This was Franklin Sousley. They're pretty sure he's from Kentucky. The guy that you can hardly see anything except part of his body and his hand. That was the sergeant, Mike Strang, and they were in the same unit. They just didn't necessarily know each other very well. And he was beloved among those. So I just thought that was important. 76 years ago today, it's a great story, and you probably know more about American history than most people anyway. Most students, most adults. If you go to Caldwell, you've learned a lot. And but I just think I didn't know anything really about that until I read the book, and I've been fascinated ever since. 76 years ago today. So let me pray for us, and anything we can pray for, I'll just leave that. All right, so let me pray. Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for this last period of the day. Pray for this test that we're going to prepare for, the test they'll have tomorrow morning. Thank you for the weather here, Lord, that 63 degrees outside. They've got golf practice, and there's a baseball game this week, and soccer I'm sure going to be playing soon, and track. So we're thankful for that. We're thankful just to be here. I pray that we can come back tomorrow and finish out this week. Thank you that public schools are back, and please help them to maintain their safety. Thank you, Father, for what happened 76 years ago. Still astonishing that people, young men, most soldiers of all wars are around 18, 19, 20-year-old. I mean, the officers are older. But most wars are fought by teenagers. And they're willing to die, and many of them have. 7,000 of them died on this island. They never went to college, maybe, unless they had graduated from college. But if you're 20, they probably never got married. They never had children, never had a career, never retired from their career. They died right here, this ugly place. It was that week. It was 36 days. But they were willing to die for the rest of us. And I pray that we would remember that, and also be willing to sacrifice ourselves for your cause, Lord, and maybe even for our country if that's called for. So bless this day. Pray that we use our time wisely. We pray this in Christ's name. Amen. All right, so what I'm going to ask you to do is get out that review sheet, and I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on this. I do want to go over a couple things. If you can use the time and want to use it, I'll give you whatever time is remaining to prepare. As I said, the guys hadn't done as good a job today as the ladies. Maybe y'all will be the exception. Megan. I can't hear you. Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah.
My great grandfather taught you what you know.
Did he really?
Yeah.
Is he still living?
No, he died when I was in preschool.
So you probably never knew him.
I knew him, but I met him in when before he died.
Was it your father or mother's side of the
My
family?
mother's side.
Has she ever talked about it? It was her grandfather, right?
We didn't talk anything about it.
Yeah.
But my uncle found out that he did. He asked him about it, and he said he got mad at him and said he didn't talk about it.
I mean, it's just, you'd think if you and I did something like that, we'd be telling everybody because we're proud of it. But, I mean, you see what these guys see, even the current soldiers are fighting Middle East. You want to forget it. You don't want to bring it up. You don't want to talk about it. You don't want to brag about it. The only people that brag about it, people probably never did it. The guys that have been there and seen that, they wish that it never happened, and they got to live with it. So that's just, it's the PTSD. You sacrifice your life while you're there, years of your life, maybe even wounded. Then you got to come home and remember it the rest of your life. It's remarkable that they're able to do that. All right, so what I'd like to look at is number 5. And if there's any of the others, and we can do this in just a few minutes. I do want you to know those several things about each of those stories. Only 3 stories. So why don't we take them one at a time? The Nun's Priest Tale. Would anybody like to tell me what? Let's start with the moral. Yeah.
Is it don't listen to flattery?
Yes. What is flattery?
It's like, when someone tries to like tell you something they didn't do. I don't really know.
Well, that was one of the best answers I've ever heard. That was an incredible answer. I've never heard anybody answer that question better than you just did. I happen to mean it. That was a good answer. But can you tell flattery when you hear it? It's like, wait a minute, you should have stopped about 2 sentences ago. I'd have believed you if you just stopped after one thing, but you keep after it. That's what flattery sounds like. That was actually a very good answer. I wasn't flattering you. But that's what flattery sounds like. Kind of, it's just something suspicious here. They want something. But there are lessons in that story. Not just the moral, that's the moral, but there are other things. You remember predestination. That was actually an entire stanza of the poem. I'm gonna probably ask you, I may not, but I think I've asked you what that means. Does anybody wanna tackle that? Predestination. Predestination. It's destination with a pre in front of it.
Before destination.
Okay, what is destination? You have a trip, you're going, what's your destination?
Before you get there.
So it's predestined, it's where the end is predicted before you get there. It's not even predicted. Predestination means that your destiny has been set. The end has already been decided. And biblically, that basically means in large that God has controlled everything that happens. God has determined ultimately that it should happen. And yet we still have free will. Don't ask me to explain that. Ask Dr. Talbert, maybe he can probably explain it. But there is free will. We're not robots that just go about what the next thing I say has been determined by God, and I have no choice in the matter. There are choices, there is free will, and yet God has also determined it. Again, I can't explain it. It especially deals with salvation. So usually when it's used in the Bible and New Testament, Paul's talking about your salvation has been predetermined by God. I just have to, every time I say that, I have to remind you what I'm saying. In other words, God determines who's saved and who's not saved. At the same time, there are two different ways to look at that. Nobody argues with that God elects people to be saved or not saved. Even Baptists and Presbyterians are completely different from this point on. But up to that point, they would agree. Not everybody's going to heaven. But the question is, on what basis does God choose people to go to heaven? And some people would say it's on the basis of, I chose God. I chose him. That's the base. He sees that I choose him, and so he picks me. The other view is that he picks me. I didn't choose him at all. No point in that I choose him. He already picked me before I chose him. So go ask your pastor, your parents, look in the Bible, see which one you believe. But that's I just wanted to take that minute to remind you that that's a huge issue, and it's we'll all find out one day. I think I know the right answer, but you need to decide for yourself. You know the characters, you know their names? Nun's Priest Tale. All right, I'm not going to go over that.
Would you like a fox or chicken? You have to know their names.
You have to know their names.
Can you listen?
There are only two names.
Chanticleer.
Chanticleer, Pertaloon. And if you go to the University of Coastal Carolina,
Is Pertaloon the
you will become a Chanticleer.
is Pertaloon the fox or the other chicken?
The fox doesn't really have a name. I think it may use the word Russell because there's an old legend, fairy tale, whatever, about a fox, and the fox was called Russell. I don't know, the word Russell may even mean fox, I don't know. But I don't think that's clear in this story, so you don't need to know his name. The other thing about that, this would be one of the themes or plot, you need to know what a mock epic is, you remember that? And you need to be able to show how this poem is a mock epic. So we can talk about that, or we can just move right on.
Wait, would you guys take
Okay, somebody remember what a mock epic is? What, did you know, Al?
It just mocks an epic.
Okay, so we have to figure out what an epic is. So what is an epic? What are the characteristics of an epic? Well, you read two of them. You should know, yes.
Lofty, elevated style, language.
Good. Can you give me a couple more? That one, by the way, is mocked in this story.
Vast settings.
That's mocked in this story.
Heroic characters.
That's mocked in this story. And their deeds, their actions are also mocked. So those four things are also mocked in this story, made fun of. So you would have to tell me how so? So, Reese, would you like to take any of those four?
The, like, elevated style, I guess, because, or just like characters, because they're not crazy heroes or anything, they're just chickens talking.
Right, so that heroic character and their heroic deeds are made fun of because they're chickens. They're not heroic characters at all. What are the heroic deeds? None. He gets attacked by a fox, he has dreams, and he outsmarts the fox. None of those are particularly heroic. Do you remember at the end of the book when he's being carried away by the fox? Here's another example of kind of the elevated language. Do you remember who he compares the hens to as they see their beloved Chanticleer being carried away? Yeah.
Like the women of Troy and like the women in Rome and stuff.
And these are hens, these are chickens. And so, and in the vast setting, instead of taking place in France and Middle East and Scandinavia, where does the entire action take place?
In like the farmyard.
In a barnyard. So he's making fun of those traits. So that would be another part of the story, and just the fact that the Chanticleer, what I'm trying to think of what you'd call him, the man tricked, fools, the con man is fooled. The con man would be the fox, the trickster, and he gets fooled by his victim, because as you remember how Chanticleer fooled him? He got fooled by the fox. Remember how that worked? And then he turns around and was able to trick the fox to save his life. Well, the rest of them are easier and quicker, but I would look at those things. How about let's go to the Physician's Tales, the next one we read. What's the moral of the story? Yeah, Ian.
Leave your sins before they take control of you.
Yes, but what does that mean?
I guess don't like things take control of you. Talk to them before they do.
So if you sin, what should you do? You've already sinned. What should you do? Confess and ask forgiveness, because otherwise, what's going to happen to you?
They're gonna take control of you.
You're going to get caught. Justice will eventually be done. So if you don't deal with it, okay, I'm sorry, I did it. I don't want to do it again. Please forgive me. Then, eventually somebody's going to catch you, and you'll be punished for it. So that's the lesson of it. Remember the four characters? Yeah.
Wasn't it like the judge, the knight?
Yeah, what are their names?
Virginius was the knight. Who's the judge?
Right. Virginius is the knight. His daughter was named state of the, one of the 50 states? Virginia. And the judge was named Appius, and the bad dude, the other guy was named Claudius. All right. And remember what is her main trait? Her name is Virginia. What is her main trait?
Her beauty.
That would actually be her second main trait. Her character, her virtue. She's a virgin, and that means more than just sexually pure. It means she was a pure person. She was kind and nice, and so that's why she became a target of the judge, because, well, she was pretty. That was part of the problem. And don't forget how it ends. I can't think of anything else. So let's go to the last one, the Friar's Tale. Tell me about the Friar's Tale. What was the moral lesson of the Friar's Tale? Yeah, now.
That you should pray for protection and repent for your sins.
You guys, yes, but you got to include one other thing that's missing from that. What was it?
Pray for protection from the devil.
Right, you have to pray about sins, but it also involves the devil, because the story is about the devil. So that has to be a part of your answer. What was the purpose of the friar telling that story? Yes.
To like get at the summoner and make all summoners look bad.
Yes. How bad are summoners according to the friar? They're so bad that they were able to do what? What was our summoner in that story able to do?
They're so bad that they're worse than the devil.
They're worse than the devil. Remember, he tempted the devil, and he said, "Listen, devil, I'll show you how to steal money from an old widow." So that's pretty bad if you're worse than the devil.
What are the characters for the friars?
I don't think we have any names, but you have the summoner and you have the other guy, and he was the devil, but he also was what, or claimed to be what? Yeah.
A yeoman?
And a
Big.
bailiff. He was identified as a yeoman. That's the way the summoner identified him. But then they agreed they were both bailiffs. And what did we say a bailiff was?
Somebody takes like church offerings or something?
Yeah, or they both summon. You know, they take summons, one from a royal court, one from a church court, and they might take taxes or whatever, but they're kind of assistants to a court.
What the summoner is? Or-
The summoner is an assistant to the archdeacon, which was a church court, and the bailiff worked for the royal court, a judge. And that's all I can think of about those three stories. There's fairly limited. Yeah.
Wait, would the old woman be one of the characters?
The widow, yeah, and she has no name. In fact, none of them have names. But that's a good point. The widow. So that's all. Unless you have a question about the others, and you're welcome to ask them. You got about 15 minutes, a little less now. Yes.
What's number 3?
Okay. Remember what we say about the prologue? Yeah, and.
It establishes structure of class and society and medieval culture, and it introduces the characters.
Hey, what's that first part again?
It establishes structure of class and society in medieval culture.
British, English medieval culture particularly, yes. It tells you what it's like to live in England in the Middle Ages. Because all these are the kinds of people you'd run into. Those 30 guys and gals, 30 people. And then you're right, structurally it introduces us to the narrators of the story. Did you have another question?
Yeah, what are some characteristics about the host?
Okay, before we answer it, let's just go back to Mallory. Okay, so it shows a variety of things. You know, there are a variety of characters, and one way to think about it is, in your mind, if they're rich and poor, old and young, clergy and laity, good and bad. So there are different ways to look at these characters, and that's why it's so helpful. You know, you get this variety of people, and they're different, and their differences make us remember them. Now, your question was about the host, Ian. So if somebody want to tell us about the host, if you were on a big trip with 30 people, this would be the kind of guy you'd like to kind of lead you to. So what were his traits? Yeah.
Isn't he like strong-willed and strong? And like he was, he's like strong-willed. He was strong, and he like started the challenge, and he broke up fights.
Yeah, and he was affable. He liked people, and he was outgoing. So he could talk to people, but he could settle disputes too. He's a big guy, so he's strong enough to you know, people respected him. Yeah.
What was the criteria of the challenge? Wasn't it you had to like have a moral to your story?
Each story had to be a moral, had to have a moral. And what's the other thing?
It had to be Christian.
Right. That was the whole point. That we wanted to entertain each other as they went to Canterbury. Yes.
Can we go over the characters and their characteristics?
Are you talking about number 2?
Yeah.
Well, we've done most of those, but if you have any that you would like to ask, we have to go.
The squire. Or
Okay.
actually, I know what the squire
All right.
is. What about the monk?
he's a monk. You know, part of that would be to know the jobs, which we did the other day, you know, like what is a Franklin, what's a yeoman, what's a reeve. The monk is a monk, you know, he lives in a monastery, he's a I don't know, priest, I don't know if that's correct, if a monk is also a priest, but anyway, what are the one or two characteristics of this guy, Mallory?
He was worldly.
Yes. And what did he like to do for a habit?
He liked hunting, and he was wealthy and lazy, and he cheated people.
Well, we don't know about the cheating part. As far as I know, I don't think it said that, but he is, you could say he's not doing his job because he's so worldly. If he's out hunting, he's not being a fisher of men. He's being a fisher of fish or a hunter of animals. He should be out hunting people, but he didn't do that. He wasn't a very good monk, but he was a great hunter. And he was large, so it means he ate well, which means he was wealthy. Also selfish. The woman of Bath and the parson, you could give at least 10 characteristics of each of those. And I don't think that I would have time to ask you for 10, but just circle them because they have lots of traits. I would expect more from them than, say, the plowman or the reeve. And put the reeve, it's always, if you can study things in groups, they're easier than having to study them separately. So the reeve and the Franklin, the reeve and the manciple go together, the Franklin and the yeoman go together, the nun and the monk go together, of course the summoner and the friar go together. They're actually together. They ride together. They hate each other. I don't know why they hate each other. Yeah.
Isn't the reeve? Isn't that not on the? Oh, sorry. Go ahead and say what up in the text. It's not.
No, it's here. At least it was on mine.
Yeah, it's not on mine. It's on,
Well, put him.
alright.
Yeah.
What do we put for the reeve?
Well, put the reeve and the manciple together because, and it says maniple. I apologize. Manciple. The reeve is a what's the word? Steward of a private estate. The manciple is a steward of a university or college. Steward is the day-to-day business manager of a particular institution. And the reeve is old and choleric, means he was easily angered. He was thin but rich. That's odd. And he loaned his boss money. It'd be like the guy who writes you your check. He pays you every week or month to work for him. You loan him money because you're better at money than your boss is. You're better making it and keeping it. So I think he's very interesting. Several things there are not typical or stereotypical. And parson is probably my favorite. Remember we talked about if gold should rust, what should iron do? Remember that was applied to him. Because, remember he wrought before he taught. He lived it out before he expected you to live it out. So he lived it out and then he taught you to do the same. He wasn't asking you to do something he wasn't already willing to do. Anything else? Yeah, this will be in the morning, as you know. I was thinking it was tomorrow afternoon. Yeah, Reed.
What is a Franklin again?
He like a yeoman is a landowner, but it appears that he's maybe owner of a bigger tract of land, a bigger farm. The yeoman owns a small farm.
Should we put the Franklin and the yeoman on there too, because they're not on the.
Well, yes. I'm sorry that's missed because you need both of those. I don't know how that happened.
So what should we put for the Franklin?
Franklin and the yeoman are landowners, but the Franklin is a landowner probably of a larger estate. And what was unique about him? The Franklin. I say unique, but what stood out? He was extremely generous and hospitable. He would share all of his stuff with his neighbors. The yeoman, the only thing that really stood out, he look like Robin Hood, because he was a forester. Make sure you have woman of bath. Of course, the knight, the doctor, the squire. I don't know why you were missing the miller. Yeah.
Who's the woman of that?
Yeah. Anybody want to tell us about her? You get about 8 or 9 things you could say about her. Will?
She was deaf, wealthy, and loved to travel. She was married 5 times, and she was a modern woman.
Yes.
And yeah, that's it. That's all I have.
She was a business owner. Yeah.
Didn't she also said that she liked to laugh and chat with company?
Right. She's very affable, like the Franklin. She's also very proud. She wanted to be the first one to get communion. Don't get in front of her. She won't like that. So she's extremely proud. But pretty admirable, other than that. Being a woman in the Middle Ages. You could put her today and she'd find a way to make money. Yeah.
Oh, what should we put for the Yeoman because they look like Robin Hood?
Say that again?
For the Yeoman, should we just put that he looked like Robin Hood?
Yeah, and what the yeoman, we don't know anything else about him, but what the yeoman was, we need to be able to find out.
What was he?
Landowner and a forester like Robin Hood. Well, what time, this is, y'all are C, right? Yeah, I'll see you first thing in the morning.
Is our test tomorrow?
What?
Is our test tomorrow?
Yeah. It's almost like we could just stay here, right? When I go home, you stay here and get up and we'll do it. All right.